this lesson. It's Primary 5 class. We are continuing with our discussion, and today we are going to look at the second group of the foreigners that came to Uganda. To take you through the previous lesson, we were looking at the first group, that was the one of the traders, whereby we looked at the groups of the traders, where they came from and what they wanted. And we finished looking at that. Mainly, we talked about the Arabs, talked about the Indians, the European traders, and then we also looked at the Katumas, the ones we said that they came from Sudan by that time. So today we are going to be looking at explorers who came to Uganda. And before we go any further, I want us to note that most of these explorers that came to Uganda were from Europe. There are four. We can also call them European explorers. That is how we can address them sometimes. We call them European explorers. On page 18 is where we get this lesson, and we want to begin by understanding who an explorer is. So here we are saying an explorer. You should be able to write the word explorer very well. An explorer is a person who travels to another area to get information. So that is how we are simply going to define an explorer. A person who goes out of his area to another purposely to find more about that area. That is to find more information about that area. So we shall be able to say that these explorers that were sent to Uganda mainly came to discover the source of River Nile. The explorers that came to Uganda, we shall simply say, they wanted to find, or we can say they wanted to discover the source of River Nile. This is a very serious note for us to understand. The explorers that came to Uganda wanted to find, or they wanted to discover the source of River Nile. We can be asked that question: how did the River Nile contribute to the coming of the European explorers? I've told you we call these European explorers because they came from a continent called Europe. Therefore, we call them European explorers. We call them the European explorers. So these explorers came purposely to find or to discover the source of River Nile. We looked at rivers and we understood those terms that are related to rivers. We talked about a source. We said a source is a point where a river starts to flow. So in other words, these explorers wanted to find where River Nile started flowing. And for that, they ended up being sent to Uganda. These explorers were mainly sent by what we call the Royal Geographical Society, RGS, Royal Geographical. The Royal Geographical Society. It is the one that paid for the trips. It is the one that sponsored the journeys that these explorers made to Uganda. As we are going to be looking at these explorers that came to Uganda. There is something that we are going to be understanding here. We have the explorers that attempted to enter Uganda, but they did not. Therefore, we are not going to be adding those ones here. But the ones that entered Uganda are the ones we are going to write down. One, we are going to have John Hanning's Peak. John Hanning's Peak. This is the one that always we write in short, say John's Peak. John's Peak. So we are having his full name, John Hanning's Peak. And then we also have James Grant. James Grant, who came with John's Peak, entered Uganda. And then we shall have another explorer, that is Henry Morton Stanley. This is the one that we write sometimes as H.M. Stanley. We should be able to tell that as we are in primary 5. And then lastly, we shall have Sir Samuel Baker. Sir Samuel Baker. We should be able to tell all this in this lesson as we are going to have. So we have to be very attentive and we have to be very keen as we are discussing this. So we begin with the first one, John Hanning's Peak. What we are going to say is John's Peak made 2 journeys to East Africa. Therefore, we are going to have John's Peak making his first journey, and then he also came for the second time. So we are going to have our map of East Africa on the board. We have the sketch map of East Africa. So in this map, we are going to show the routes that these people used when they were coming to to Uganda. For us, we are basically looking at the ones that entered Uganda. However, we shall also understand others that did not enter. Now, we shall say that when these people came, they entered through Bagamoyo mainland. Shall we have the Bagamoyo here? Bagamoyo. This was the main entry point. Where they could enter what we call the interior. Interior means the inside part of it. That is inside. So we are looking at a lake here. That is Lake Victoria. Remember, this is the one that has got the source. Now, we need to understand that it would be very short for these people to have used this area that is from Kenya. This would be the shortcut direct to Lake Victoria. However, there were some hostile tribes in Kenya. For example, we have the Nandi, and then we have the Maasai. So such tribes were hostile to these visitors, to these explorers. Therefore, they feared to pass there. So they decided to go for longer journeys or longer distance as long as they were safe. So we are going to say that these explorers entered through Bagamoyo. Reason being, Bagamoyo was friendly, or it was having friendly people. So here we are going to look at the first journey that was made by John's Peak together with Richard Burton. Richard Burton. Now we have not put Burton in this list, and we want to get the reason as we continue with our explanation. Now, these two came, they went to Zanzibar. You will be asked questions. Why did these explorers go to Zanzibar? You will find that whoever could come before entering, they had to go to Zanzibar. So they could go to Zanzibar, one, to get permission from the Sultan, from the leader, to enter the interior. Two, to get interpreters, people who could interpret their languages. And also sometimes they could go there to get potters, people who are to help them. So we are having John Speke and James Grant, Richard Burton in the first journey, coming, that is in 1857. They came and they reached Tabora. So we are going to have a place here called Tabora. From Tabora, we have a lake here. We have a lake here. This is the longest lake we have in East Africa. Remember, this is what we call East Africa. So this is the longest lake that we call Lake Tanganyika. So they moved up to a place which was called Ujiji. And from Ujiji, they returned to Tabora. That is where Richard Burton fell sick and he could not move any further. Therefore, Speke had to continue. When I talk of Speke, I'm meaning John Speke. Speke continued from Tabora. He left Burton sick and he went northwards. When he came across, when he saw a large mass of water, he assumed it was the source of River Nile, and therefore he went back and he told his friend about his findings. But the history says that when he told Richard Burton did not accept. He said, no, you are lying. So the two went back to Britain. They went back to Europe when they were having that kind of disagreement. Therefore, as Speke was giving a report, Grant was rubbishing it. So in other words, they were not having a report which was matching. Which means that it made the people who sent them not to have a proof or a clear information about their findings. And as a result, John Speke had to be sent back to Uganda with another person. Therefore, Richard Burton ended here in Tanzania. That is where he fell sick from. He did not enter Uganda. Even Speke in that first journey did not enter Uganda. He first saw the lake here and he concluded, he saw a large mass of water. He was like, wow, that must be the source. And he went back, told a friend who disagreed with him. They went back as enemies with that disagreement. And I have said, in the second journey, we have John Speke sent again with another explorer. And that time, he was now given James Grant. So we are now having John Speke coming back with James Grant to East Africa. Now, John Speke already knew the routes. Therefore, they had to pass the same area. John Speke moved with Grant. They came, still entered through Bagamoyo, entered to Tabora. From Tabora, they moved to, there was a kingdom here called Karagwe Kingdom. Karagwe Kingdom, this is Karagwe. When they moved to Karagwe, where they were welcomed by the Rumanika of Karagwe, that is, as you can say, they were welcomed by the king of Karagwe Kingdom. Let me simplify it like that. And it's from this Karagwe Kingdom that James Grant also fell sick and could no longer move. Therefore, Speke was still strong. That this time, he left James Grant at Karagwe, that is in the hands of the Rumanika, and he entered. This time, John Speke entered. So we are having him now crossing the border, and he has entered Uganda. Therefore, he comes to Uganda. Therefore, for that case, we shall say, John Speke became the first European explorer to enter Uganda. I believe we are able to see that. And I have said he was later on joined by Grant. Grant also recovered and later on joined him. That's why we are having James Grant also in this list. We have not put Richard Burton. We said Burton remained here. This is not Uganda, this is Tanzania. Therefore, the two were entertained by the Baganda, and this was the time when Kabaka Mutesa I was the king of Uganda. You can be asked that question. Who was the king of Uganda by the time the explorers visited or came to Uganda? Now, we have this, John Speak had a gift for the king, that is a gun that we call a rifle. You can be asked, what was the special gift that John Speak presented to the king of Uganda, that is Kabaka Mutesa I? That was a rifle, and from that, John Speak moved to Jinja, where he saw the falls, the waterfalls. He saw the falls, and he named those Ripon Falls. Ripon Falls. He saw the falls at the source, he named them Ripon Falls. Now, who was Ripon? We have Lord Ripon. We had Lord Ripon, who was the president of the Royal Geographical Society. Lord Ripon was the president of the Royal Geographical Society. Just like this lake, we shall say that John Speak named it Victoria. For us in Uganda, the lake was locally known as Narubale, which was meaning the home of the small gods. I believe we learned about that. So when he saw the lake, he named it Victoria. That was after Queen Victoria of England by that time. So we shall be able to note that these explorers brought names from their countries to give to the physical features that were in Uganda, that were in East Africa. Therefore, we have Speak reaching the source, and for that case, that is in 1862, and for that case we shall say that Speak became now the first European explorer to see the source of the source of River Nile in Jinja here. Now, we are specific, we say he became the first European explorer, not just the first person. It will be wrong for one to say Speak was the first person. Reason being, before Speak, there were already people who had settled, who were staying around that area, so they had already seen. But we say Speak became the first European explorer, or we simply say he became the first explorer to see the source. So that is what we also need to know. Now, we have Speak returning. He went back, and when he reached Gondokoro, we shall have a place here in South Sudan, which was known as Gondokoro. Gondokoro, in your book you have this diagram. When he reached Gondokoro, remember the Nile flows. The Nile flows northwards, it goes up to Egypt. When he reached Gondokoro, he met another explorer, who was trying to trace, or he was also following the Nile from its mouth. That is, remember the mouth of a river, that is a place where a river pours its water. So, for us to say the mouth of River Nile is in Egypt, that is in the Mediterranean Sea. So we have this explorer who had tried to follow this Nile from where it pours its water. And he was hoping to reach where it begins to flow, that is its source in Lake Victoria. But when the two met at Gondokoro here, this was Sir Samuel Baker. Sir Samuel Baker. Sometimes you will be asked, remember Sir Samuel Baker came with a wife, and for that case we shall always be asking you, who was the first European explorer to come to Uganda with a wife? We shall be able to know that is Sir Samuel Baker. And you will also be able to answer questions saying, which European explorer tried to follow or tried to trace the source of River Nile, starting from its mouth, that is starting from where it pours the water? That is still Sir Samuel Baker. So we are having Sir Samuel Baker coming, and the two met at Gondokoro with John Speak, and this is where John Speak told him that he had already found the source. He said, I've already seen the source, it's in a lake. The Ugandans were calling it Narubale, but I have named it Victoria. That is after our Queen of England. So, as he went back, Sir Samuel Baker continued, but instead of going now to the source, because he was already told about the findings, he now decided to branch to the western part of Uganda. So we have Sir Samuel Baker coming, and he went to western, and he came to Bunyoro. That is where he met the Omukama Kambrasi, that was by that time the father to Omukama Kabalega. And from that he went and named this lake that was called Lake Mutanzije, that we now know as Lake Albert. So we shall also be able to note that he named Lake Mutanzije Albert. Now, who was Albert at that time? Albert was the husband of Queen Victoria of England at that time. So, like I said, these explorers gave our physical features the names of their prominent people from their countries. And this Sir Samuel Baker returned, or he went back to Britain. So that is Sir Samuel Baker. And that's why we have him here, Sir Samuel Baker. He entered Uganda. Now, when Speke reached, after presenting the report, there was need for the other people who sent him to prove. Therefore, we are going to have another explorer who was sent to Uganda, purposely to find out, to prove whether the findings of John Speke were true. John Speke said the source is in Lake Victoria. Therefore, Henry Morton Stanley, the one we call H.M. Stanley, was sent purposely to prove the findings of John Speke. We need to be very careful with this information, because sometimes we end up mixing this. We are having why H.M. Stanley was sent to Uganda, and then we shall be having why H.M. Stanley had to circumnavigate, to sail around the lake. There are two different questions we need to answer there. The first one I've already answered. He was sent to Uganda to prove whether John Speke was talking the truth. That is, to prove the findings of John Speke. So he came, used the same route. Remember, we said that the Arabs had had entered before the coming of these explorers. So the Arabs had already created these routes that they could pass. So he used the same routes, entered, came to Tabora, from Tabora to Karagwe. From Karagwe, he came and sailed around. So in your map, you have this explorer who sailed around this lake. This is what we call circumnavigate. Circumnavigate. In simple understanding, we shall say to sail around. To sail around. So we are saying H.M. Stanley came and he had to circumnavigate. Why was he sailing around? He was sailing around the lake to draw its map. I want you to get the two questions. The first one I asked, why was H.M. Stanley sent? We said he was sent to prove the findings of John Speke. We have again asked, why did he have to circumnavigate? He circumnavigated Lake Victoria to draw its map. So as he was sailing around the lake, he drew its map, and after he came to Uganda. Still met the Kabaka, that is Kabaka Mutesa I, the very king that that John Speke had met. And from this, that we shall be able to say that the king requested Stanley to write a letter to the Queen of England requesting the missionaries to be sent or to be brought to Uganda, that is to help the people how to read and write. So we have we have Stanley writing the letter at the request of the Kabaka, that was Kabaka Mutesa I. We need to get this well. we have two people contributing to the coming of the missionaries. The king who invited, he requested Henry Morton Stanley to write the letter. And Henry Morton Stanley wrote the letter, which was inviting the missionaries to come to Uganda, and the letter was sent. Therefore, we have Stanley continuing from Uganda. He continued his journey up to Western. That is why you will see there is that journey in your book. We used this kind of shading with the X, a line with the X. That is Henry Morton Stanley. He circumnavigated, he came to Uganda, then he moved towards Western, whereby we say he came across Mountain Rwenzori, and he named it the Mountains of the Moon. Reason being, we say that the snow which was on Mountain Rwenzori appeared, or it was shining like a rising moon. So he named this mountain as Mountains of the Moon. That one is what we need to note about Henry Morton Stanley. Now, we shall be able to go back. Of course, Henry Morton Stanley now returns. And we are having also the other ones of Sir Samuel Baker also returning. Now, we are going to be looking at what we call the Equatorial Province, that I want us to add in our booklets. If there is no space, you will kindly get a book, your diary with a pen, and then we talk about Equatorial Province. Before we go and we look at the missionaries who came, who are invited by the Kabaka. Equatorial Province. Now, this we call Equatorial Province. We shall say, remember we said Sir Samuel Baker had come from Egypt, that is from the Mediterranean Sea, where the river pours its water, and he was hoping to reach its source. So, because of him having a good connection with the Egyptians as he was coming, the Egyptians were now trying to use him as one of the attempts or one of the ways of them succeeding in colonizing or ruling Uganda. Remember, we shall be able to note in this class that Egypt is that African country that had wanted to take over Uganda, that is to rule Uganda or to colonize Uganda. We have very many words that we can use. So the Egyptians, through Khedive Ismail, that was the leader, that was the king, I should say, of Egypt, Khedive Ismail. Ismail trying to use Sir Samuel Baker as the governor or as someone who could try to convince Ugandans to accept the Egyptian policy. Remember, the River Nile begins from Uganda, that is in Lake Victoria, as we saw. It goes up to Egypt. And Egypt is that country that entirely depends on this Nile. They remember Egypt is some like a desert country. So for them, water is a challenge. So they take that river as their main source. So they use it. So what we mean by Equatorial Province was the area which was made up of the northern part of Uganda and the southern part of Sudan. This is the northern part of Uganda, whereas this part is the southern part of Sudan. By that time, this country was known as Sudan. It was a very large country. It was not yet divided as it is today, as we have now South Sudan as also an independent country. It was Sudan as a very large country. So that southern part of Sudan, by that time, together with the northern part of Uganda, formed what we call the Equatorial Province. Now, this had its headquarters at a place which was called Gondokoro. The headquarters were based in Gondokoro, that is in that southern part of Sudan, that we call today Juba. So, we are having Sir Samuel Baker used by these Egyptians to try convincing the leaders of Uganda to accept the Egyptian policies. However, most of these leaders rejected that idea. One of them was Omukama Kabalega, who was now the king after the death of his father, Omukama Kambrasi, but he rejected the idea of Sir Samuel Baker. Therefore, Sir Samuel Baker failed. We now have these people as governors. Governors. They were the ones that Egypt was trying to use to help them to get or to rule Uganda. We have this taken to page 22 in our workbooks. You have seen it there. Therefore, when Sir Samuel Baker returned, these Egyptians appointed Sir Charles Gordon, who was a colonel. We write the word colonel like this. Sometimes we write it in short. That is how we write colonel. Colonel. Sometimes we just abbreviate it. We write it in short by writing Carl Charles Gordon. Charles Gordon. That also tried to convince Ugandans and the Sudanese to accept the Egyptian rules or policies. Still, he also failed. And finally, they appointed Edward Sniza, Sir Edward Sniza, who was also named or nicknamed as Emin Pasha. Emin Pasha was a German doctor who was nicknamed Emin Pasha, who also tried, but he also failed. And when this one failed, it meant that Egypt's attempt to colonize Uganda failed there. Therefore, Egypt did not colonize Uganda, but it had attempted. We need to take serious note of that. There is something that is very interesting we need to talk about, as in for Sir Samuel Baker. He was the first one here, Sir Samuel Baker. These are the governors now of Equatorial Province. Now, when Sir Samuel Baker was a governor before retiring, we need to realize, we need to note that this person, he was against the issue of slave trade. Remember, we talked about the Arabs introducing slave trade in Uganda. So, slave trade was seriously practiced. So, Sir Samuel Baker could protect these people. This is where we have the Acholi people in northern here, mainly. So, for that case, we shall have a sentence, we have a question that why was Sir Samuel Baker loved by the Acholi people? Or why was Sir Samuel Baker loved by the people in northern Uganda during that time when he was a governor in Uganda? So he was loved because he could protect these Acholi people from the slave traders, and that's why the Acholi loved him so much. Now, when Edward Sniza, that is Emin Pasha, came to power as the third governor, he wanted again to bring the idea of slave trade. Therefore, it made the Acholi, together with the Sudanese, to give him hard time. Because unlike for Sir Samuel Baker, who was protecting them, again this one was bringing slave trade. And that made him, they actually even end up cutting his connection with the Egyptian government. Therefore, he could no longer receive support from Egypt. Remember, for you to reach Egypt, there is Sudan first. And now the Sudanese are not happy with you. They have cut your communication. They have cut your supply. Egypt cannot supply again anything to you. So we say that Emin Pasha remained stranded in the Equatorial province. That is the time again that they sent Henry Morton Stanley back to Uganda. So we have Stanley making 2 journeys to Uganda. That's the second time he came now to rescue Emin Pasha from the Equatorial province, and he took him away. So that is what we need to note about the explorers in Uganda. So when we are asked which explorer was also a governor, or which explorer became a governor, we need to note that was Sir Samuel Baker. He first came as an explorer, and we said because of the good connection he had with the Egyptians as he was coming in his first journey, the Egyptian government decided to make him the first governor. That is, to try to convince Ugandans to accept to be ruled by the Egyptians, of which he did not succeed. And we have concluded by saying Egypt just attempted, or it wanted to rule Uganda, but it did not. Next in our discussion, we shall be looking at the missionaries. Remember, we said Henry Morton Stanley, as an explorer, played a role towards the coming of these missionaries. So in our next lesson, we shall be looking at those missionaries and everything about them. For now, I want to thank you so much for being part of this lesson, and I urge you to continue accessing more of these lessons such that you keep updated and you will be having enough of the knowledge to take you through the primary 5 class. May God keep on blessing you. Goodbye for now.